Pedro's going to go through in detail with you over the next 45 minutes around succession planning and the benefits of it to a business and how successful businesses now are looking at their talent pipeline. A great example was just this weekend. So we're still in the throes of the success of our Irish rugby team who won the Grand Slam. And one of the big things that came out of that when I was looking at on the weekend was back in 2015, Joe Schmidt as manager knew the bench strength wasn't right and he needed to bring in future leaders and future talent. And he addressed that 2 years ago. And you saw on the weekend how now he has that bench strength. And I think there's some definite lessons learned around that for businesses and organizations today. So again, thank you for joining us. This webinar, of course, is recorded, so you can share with your colleagues afterwards as well within your business and enjoy the session. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody. How's the energy? So, Pedro Angulo, delighted to be here and delighted to have the opportunity been given by the IMI to share with you some of my research, some of my ideas, some of my own views around the topic of succession planning and management. The purpose, as I see it, of this session is no other than to really give you one or two things that you can take away, bring it to your own practices, embed it into them, and hopefully they can give you a little bit of a lift in terms of the impact of your current practices. So as the psychologists would put it together, we are not looking for you to take all of this and plant it in your organization. It's more to give you a few ideas, a few thoughts, and then for you to review those things and say, okay, well, that makes sense for me. Maybe that didn't make sense for me, and that's okay too. But I'm hoping that everybody can take away one thing that will really, you can take away, apply in your organization and hopefully give you a little bit of some benefit in the way you identify talent, in the way you manage talent, or in the way you assess talent. So there's quite a bit of content on the slides, and the only reason for that is to share with you those slides afterwards so that you can have a real detailed deck in terms of information where you can go to find more stuff, some of the critical steps. But I don't plan to go through all the detail. I'm just going to go through the slides and tell you maybe one or two things that I think are relevant with a view that with 10 minutes or so to go, we'll open up to discussion, questions, anything that I can do to answer maybe some of your questions. So hope you enjoy it and hopefully you get something of benefit. I think the first thing I want to share with you is that, you know, to do succession management or talent management in the old days, it was easier than nowadays. Not saying that it was done properly, but it certainly was easier in a predictable environment where you knew what were the roles, who was on those roles, and it was easier to have a visibility as to what was going to happen and how to put people in the right place and develop them in a way to build their capability so that you have bench strength and leaders ready to take up those more senior roles. I think one of the key things that I see now that is different from before is that lack of predictability. New jobs are created that weren't there before. Chief data officer, 5-10 years ago, we didn't know that that was a position. Suddenly now that has become one of the most critical positions in every organization. So for me, that lack of predictability, jobs being created, jobs disappearing, how do you manage? How do you assess talent? What capabilities are you looking for in an unpredictable environment? I think that's what raises the complexity on the topic of succession management today. So I'm going to, again, give you a few ideas, and hopefully that will help you to bring some predictability to a highly unpredictable environment. First of all, as Dave said, let's talk about maybe some of the reasons as to why succession management is important. And rarely you will find that CEOs, CFOs, and CHROs are singing of the same hymn sheet. But according to the Conference Board, a very recent research paper, they said that one of the things that they all agree on tends to be that the risk of retaining and attracting the right people. We are already back into a war for talent, a topic that was used maybe 5-6 years ago. We are finding organizations are struggling to find the right talent for the right jobs at the right time. And needless to say, that failure to attract those people, to retain those people, to develop the new future generation leaders, it creates a great risk for any organization. More specifically, if you look at small to medium businesses, every time you look at research on the media, from consultancy firms, from accountancy firms, succession, again, is one of those big things that needs to take place that is probably not happening as effectively or as frequently as it should happen. And just this recent Irish Times article, again, it mentions the whole thing around the war for talent and the difficulty that organizations in Ireland are experiencing finding the right people. Some CEOs have been quoted recently, as you know, in the press, as saying that one of the biggest barriers to organizations nowadays to achieve the growth targets that they want to achieve is the lack of, actually, that they cannot find the people they need on the jobs they need to sustain that growth. And I think HR has a huge opportunity here, working with business leaders to create this pipeline of talent, of future leaders that can help drive the business growth opportunities. So here is the interesting thing. We all know that talent management and succession management is quite interesting, but in my experience and according to research, a lot of organizations are actually not putting any succession plans in place. And not only that, when you know, a lot of organizations that have succession plans in place, there's no follow through, or even more frustrating, you have people in succession maps or plans, and then an opportunity comes up where there is a job opening, and then what we find is that the people in the succession plan are actually not the ones selected for that post, which creates all sorts of credibility challenges and issues with the process. Bringing you now to the whole succession management maturity model. The reason why I'm putting this in here is to hit the message home that proper talent management and succession management, we all know is important, but very few, or not a lot of organizations are probably either doing it or doing it to a level of high effectiveness, or as Deloitte will call it, maturity level. If we look at their research in terms of version by Deloitte, most organizations that they have researched globally, 21% are at level 0, so that means they don't have anything. And then more interestingly, if you look at the others, about 70% of organizations are still using fairly traditional, standard, non-sophisticated succession processes and talent processes to support the growth and implementation of their strategies. Particularly interesting to see when you look at the highest level of sophistication, which is level 4, the call out for transparency, the call out for making clear to people why are they where they are, what do they need to do to get to become a hypo, to become ready for a job. That integration among all the HR practices and processes with succession planning. And again, what I would say to you is, for me, the key question is, as you look at that slide, where do you think your organization is in terms of the sophistication level? And then more importantly, what can you do as a result of today with your leadership team to say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that we can put in place to see we can raise the sophistication level from, say, level 2 to level 3 or level 3 to level 4. Right, so just as a summary, what is the case for succession planning and management? Well, I honestly think that we have no choice. Dave used a very good example. In rugby, if you don't have somebody coming on the pitch, if you get somebody injured, suddenly you're not playing with 15 players, you're playing with 14, creates all sorts of gaps, and then suddenly your team is not performing and you lose the game. Well, I truly believe that in organizations it's exactly the same. The most important thing for a board of management is to ensure the sustainability and the longevity of organizations. One of those things is that we have the right structure, the right leadership and the right plan in place to drive that organization. And the key thing that they're looking at is, do we have the right people in the right job at the right time to drive the implementation of that strategy? The moment that we lose somebody in a job that is critical to the organization, and then we go to market and that job or that person, that capability is not easily or readily available, then we have a serious critical issue that it will impact in any business dramatically. So I think, to me, is if you want to ensure organizational survival, is a no-brainer. More importantly, I think the other thing that I also like is that by working with your people, by giving them transparency, clarity around where they are, where they need to get to, what are their aspirations in terms of role, progression, having those open conversations around, okay, here is where you are, here's where we see you, where would you like to go to, and how can we support that development to get you to wherever you need to do in the context of the organizational needs. I think that creates a really healthy discussion around people, around development, around growth, around renewal. And I think that's a wonderful, that could create a wonderful culture of growth mindsets and productivity. So another reason I think why succession is critically important for those of us who are more into show me the money, as they say in Jerry Maguire. You know, when we track the cost of people leaving, sometimes we just look at the cost of, well, how much is it going to cost me to hire that person? And normally we think about the cost associated with getting a consultancy company or a recruitment company or somebody to help us get that person into post. And yeah, that could be quite costly. But funnily enough, when you look at research, that's probably the smaller component. I want to draw your attention to the part below the line in terms of the true cost of getting somebody back in, particularly around the cost of the loss of productivity. Before the departure, during their departure as the position is vacant, and then the time of replacement. There is a huge cost around disruption, lack of productivity, lack of focus, lack of direction, and particularly if you have somebody who is left in a critical post, maybe managing a team of over 100, 200 people, you can see how disruptive, how costly that could be. And again, look at also the lost opportunity. If you have somebody in a strategic area, not looking at where the business should go to next, not only is the cost of what you cannot do, but it's the cost of missing opportunities in terms of growth, in terms of opportunities to develop new products. So it's bad business all around. I honestly believe it's quite interesting. You know, when we talk about succession management and talent management, we often go for very complex solutions and very complex frameworks and a lot of jargon and stuff. But one of the things that has really landed to me is that the most important thing when you're talking to your senior executives is to make sure that we use, all of us, consistent language that has been agreed in your business as to what in the name of God do we mean by talent or succession or high potentials. Biggest mistake that we can make is to assume that everybody understands what that means. And I truly believe that, you know, one of the key takeaways from here is that if you were to ask your team, what does talent mean? What does succession mean? What does high potential mean? What would they say? And would their definition align with your definition? The moment that you have people making calls on people based on different interpretations, based on different definitions, that's when you have a problem, because we're not comparing apples with apples. And to me, at the most basic level, we need to crack that and make sure that everybody has commonly identified terms and definitions. I've given you a couple of them. I think more importantly is for you to have your conversation with your executive and find out what does it mean to you in your own business. Okay, now this is a big, very busy slide, right? But I think it's an important slide because it shows not only the complexity of the market that I showed you earlier, but it shows that the mistake that we can make is to see succession planning in isolation. And I believe that true leading edge succession management practices are truly aligned with other HR processes. Just if you look at the talent area there, so you have the way you acquire talent. So what does your talent acquisition team do? How connected are in the marketplace? Do they know what are the people, the skills that are, you know, quite easily accessible? Do they know what are the skills and competencies that are very difficult to find? Do they know who are the best people in the market, not just in Ireland, but everywhere in the world, to do a job that is critically important to you? They are almost like your scouts of the market. They need to know what is available, what is the risk, what are the costs, so that then when you are thinking about your internal talent, whether you acquire talent, where you develop talent, what's the cost versus the benefit, they should have a core input in informing your decision-making process based on what's going on in the marketplace, and who are the best people, the cost of those people, the difficulty of finding those people. And again, that's just a small element of how talent should connect with succession management. But the same thing if you look at leadership development. You and I have been too many times out there talking to our leaders about the importance of identifying people, putting them in the right category. And let's be honest, to get people in business, I find, to differentiate among a strong performer, a normal performer, and any sort of differentiation, we find it difficult. But here is the even more frustrating thing. Once we differentiate, we put people into boxes, but then nothing happens as a result. Again, what's the point in doing anything if you're just going to put people in boxes and nothing is going to happen as a result? You're better off not doing it. So that's when leadership development, that's when development in general kicks in. So we know Pedro is here in that box. Okay, we know Pedro has this. We know Pedro doesn't have this. What are we going to do with Pedro? And what do we agree? And how can we have that conversation with Pedro? And how are we going to develop that Pedro to maybe make an improvement, grow the way that we need him to grow in a way that he's obviously happy with? But what do we do with that person's development to build them into that future leader? And performance management. So how do we manage, how do we reward our critical talent? Do we pay and reward everybody the same? Do we differentiate how we pay people? Do we have a choice? Do we have an option? But it's about making sure that the way we manage these people is consistent, is aligned, and all of that, as far as possible, are joint. If you are starting the journey, what I would say to you, again, start small bits and then increase the complexity. So as they say, start eating the elephant a bite at a time. So what I would say is, if you never have done anything around succession planning, keep it very simple. Maybe just identify your critical roles, identify your critical people, just a quick analysis, a quick conversation, a bit of development, a little bit of support, coaching for them. And then as you become more mature, start trying to align in this succession, these discussions to some of the other processes. I believe that anytime I have done anything in HR where we have tried to bring something, whether it is to do with performance management or succession management or technology, the moment that you try to link that to all the value chain of processes in HR, it becomes so complex, so difficult, so needy of requirements and people's time. It could become overwhelming. So my recommendation, rightly or wrongly, is that start small, make sure it works, measure the impact, show that it delivers results for the business, and then grow and start connecting it to some of the other processes in your HR area and business. So I love this article by the Harvard Business Review. Do you have a game-changing talent and strategy? I think, I just wanted to highlight it because it's almost like a really handy, kind of as they call it, almost like a checklist that I would find useful in terms of what are some of the key things to look for in terms of, do you have a game-changing or a proper kind of talent strategy? I think for me, some of the key things are around points 6, 7, and 11. Well, let's start with 1, right? I think nowadays, organizations that want to attract the best, when we look at millennials and now centennials, we actually have centennials working for us now. So it's just such a, the one thing that comes through from research is that people, they look for purpose. But I will go further. I don't think it's just the centennials and the millennials. People as young as me would also look for purpose. I think everybody needs to connect with purpose. So I think organizations that want to have a leading edge talent strategy, they have to appeal more than just money and roles and extrinsic motivation. They have to appeal to a higher purpose, something bigger, something greater. And it's about identifying the organization's purpose, the individual purpose, and see whether those two meet. And as I said, if you want to attract the best of the best, you and I know, I have been at a recent interview in panels, and one of the questions some people ask you is, what are you doing around your corporate and social responsibility? How are you, linking with communities? It's just a different way of doing things, and I think it's a really good way of doing things. So maybe, do you have a clear purpose? Are you helping people articulate their own purpose and connect with your organizational purpose? that could be something exciting to do. More fundamentally, I think what I really believe is that for talent of anything to work, it needs to become, it needs to become seen as a key role of the leader. So as a leader, I have to see that a core element of my job is to have ongoing conversations with my people, with my team, around our talent, around our people, around the capabilities for the future, around what are we doing, how are we, what are the risks, how are we going to cover it, what if something happens. The moment that this becomes something that becomes detached from that, and it becomes a once in a 6 or 12 months event, if this is seen as something that just HR does, you and I know, it just doesn't get the legs. So for me, I think when we're looking at the talent of the future, one of the things that we need to look is for leaders that value leadership, that are driven to lead people, to motivate people, to identify talent, to grow the next leaders that grow leaders, and that they see leadership as core to their job rather than maybe something else we call a pain in the bum. So anyway, just another helpful resource. So more specifically, we look at succession management, and again, this is just to give you a flavor. This is just a lot of stuff. There's no way I'm going to cover everything, but just want to give you some of the stuff that I have found useful, and maybe a few things that you can pick from here. But if you look at a succession planning end to end, there are some of the keywords that you take away. What are your critical roles? Do you know what the critical roles are? I will give you some tips around how can you go around identifying those roles. Talent capability and potential, talent availability. Do you do validation of that talent? Do you tend to go to market to get this talent? Do you build the talent? Do you have a mixed strategy? How do you go about that? How good are you at mobility, at creating leadership mobility around the business? Or are you getting leaders that just are becoming very technical and grow just purely through their own area of expertise? Are you allowing for those two things to happen? Because in fairness, some people, they love the technical bit, so why not to enable them to progress just on a technical career path? And equally, there are other people that are maybe more driven by the leadership side, so enable them to do the other. And again, there's a future bench. How do you create future bench? And more importantly, in the context of the environment, how do you create future bench for jobs that are not, they don't exist today? So I think that's when the capabilities really come into place. And I will share with you some of those capabilities of the future that might be helpful. So sometimes when we're building capability, we need to build capability for roles, for jobs. But I would say maybe we just have to also build capability for capabilities that are needed for the future, because we just don't know what those new jobs will be like when they come up. And just to be ready in terms of the actual capabilities rather than the actual jobs. Okay, another succession management process. This one is by Seb. Really good process, really robust. Plenty of detail there around all the steps. In terms of the webinar, though, let me give you what I call the Pedro version of that model, which is a light version. Just to get you going, just to get you in terms of the criticality to some of the things. So for me, the first thing is, and this is for most things, you have to get business engagement and business sponsorship and business buy-in. If this is not a business thing, it just fails, doesn't work as well as it should. And the risk is that it just becomes a pain in the neck and a paper exercise. So I think, if nothing else, try to get your senior leaders, get them to buy into this, get them to see the benefit, help them to create a space to have these conversations. I honestly believe that any leader that I speak to or talk to anywhere, they know this is important. They know this is critical, but so they have another 10,000 things. So for me, as HR leaders, as business leaders, I think sometimes maybe the best thing that we can do for our business leaders is to help them create a space to talk about these things. And I think by doing that, that's probably as much as is needed, because in my view, the buy-in should come as a result. Next thing is identify those critical roles for the organization. And again, this is about having a conversation with your business team to say, okay, what are the critical roles to the organization, to implementation of the business strategy? What you and I will find is when you ask people, what are your critical roles? Every role is critical. And that's one of the challenges. Not all jobs can be critical. All of the jobs are important, but we have to find out about almost like the 20-80 rule, right? What are those 20% of the roles that deliver 80% of the results? Or are the 80% most important to deliver on the strategy or to get the sales? Or we have to find a way of being very, very selective through some objective criteria that I'll share with you some thoughts on that as to what are those 10% of roles really that if for whatever reason they're not covered by the right people at the right time, could create some serious impact on the performance of your organization. Equally, I think it's quite important to know who are those high performers in your organization. By the 80-20 rule, again, it's quite interesting. According to that rule, 20% of your people are delivering 80% of your results. Now, look, let's not get stuck in terms of percentages, right? But there are those people that are delivering, exceeding by far what other people are delivering. And we need to find them, and we need to know who they are. And we need to know who they are and manage them accordingly. The other thing as well is to identify who are your high potentials. And for me, the key thing is that you can be very high performing, but maybe not a high potential. But rarely you'll be a high potential without being a high performer. But it is important that we identify who are those leaders of the future that have the potential to step up, maybe one, maybe two roles up to the place where they are at the moment. And how are we going to identify them? How are we going to mind them? And again, I will give you a few ideas on that. Once you have all of that analysis, then you have to look at the supply and the demand for people, these kind of roles, these kind of capabilities. And then that will feed into your decisions around whether it's better to build it internally, maybe buy it externally, or what is the best decision to make sure that you have that covered for your succession plan. And then I think for me, critically important is that you have some robust calibration sessions with the business to really agree, are they really the critical roles? Are they really the critical people? Are we in agreement that they're the right people? For me, the easiest thing is to put the piece of paper up with the names of the roles and say, are we comfortable that these are it? And if anybody in the business was to look at them, they would agree that, yeah, that's fair enough, they are the roles. Equally, if you have your high potentials or your thing, how comfortable would you be to put up that list to other people in the business and say, here are the people that we identify as the future leaders or whatever? Will you be comfortable to do that? And if people saw that list, would they say, okay, maybe my name is not there, but by God, the people that are there look like the right people? Anyway, just a very simple way to test for credibility. And again, for me, the key thing is that no point in having a process and going through all this time and all of that if there's no action. And more importantly, action, and then we measure the impact. So did the action, did the developmental intervention, the coaching, the mentoring, sending people to the IMI, whatever it is that you did with these people, did they have the results that we were looking for on that person? And can we see a progression on that person in terms of their position in the succession plan, in terms of their confidence, in terms of whatever it is that we were going to work with them? So what was the impact? And then what are the next actions for the next term? Okay, so let's go into some of those steps and just give you a few tools and techniques just to help you hopefully get some of this stuff going, or maybe fine-tune what you already have. So when you look at identifying critical roles, there's a whole draft of things that you can use. For me, I'm going to pick maybe on 3 or 4. The first one is the obvious one. What is the level of impact on the bottom line results? So for me, it's what's the impact of this job on P&L? That would be the first thing. And the second, one of the key things. The other thing would be, what's the impact of that role on the customer experience? So for me, when you're looking at impact, is what's the criticality of the impact of those jobs on either your customer experience or your P&L? That has to be a key. They have to be key determinants, in my opinion. I think the other thing as well is what's the risk? So, for example, somebody can have, a position can have a very key impact on a particular area, but if it is easy to replace, if it is easy to fill with somebody else, if there is low risk, then obviously the criticality, you need to manage that slightly differently. The other one that I think is interesting there is number 6. sometimes you can have somebody managing some really critical roles, and those are kind of positions also that need to be quite carefully identified. Because if you have a lot of critical positions being managed by a role or a leader that is not enabling the high performance of those roles and people, you could have a serious issue. For me, actually, one of the key lessons is that think about your high potentials, your top talent, and think about who are the people managing these people, and are they enabling their growth, or are they stifling their growth, and are they being good to them, or are they, how are they enabling their growth, maybe rather than something else. And then obviously another one I want to highlight to you, but again, depending on where you are, you might find others are more important, is the current market value to of the position. So they're just some ideas. For me, again, the key thing is to have this conversation with the business, identify the criteria, have the discussion, put all the roles through the criteria, and as objectively as you can, come up with those 10% of jobs that are business critical, most critical to the achievement of the strategy. Okay, so here is a little 2x2. People love 2x2s and this kind of stuff, so I'm going to give you a couple of them. The first one is around critical roles, and it's very simple. Just look at, the difficulty to replace a role and the impact on performance. And maybe if you have high and high, they could be your critical roles, or whatever you want to call them. Again, the point of putting roles or people in different boxes is it's not to box people or jobs or roles. It's mainly to say, okay, if something or someone or a job is in this particular area, what does it mean? What's the impact? How should we deal with it? What's the treatment strategy? So it's almost like when you segment your customers. We need to do similar stuff, I think, with people and say, well, look, we can't treat all the people the same way because different people need different things. So depending on where people are, where jobs are, I think we need to deal with them slightly differently. So this is something that you probably have seen. This is one of the most standardized techniques, which is the succession plan for critical roles. So for me, the key thing is once you identify the critical roles for the organization, then you need to think about, okay, so who are the people that could be available or could be ready to step up into those jobs should the person in those jobs decide to go or something happens. And normally what happens is you have, an emergency cover if you don't have somebody ready now. So in the case if you don't have somebody ready now, who is your emergency cover? Ideally, you have somebody ready now. And then what you could also see is that for some of those jobs, some people might be ready in 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe even 24 months. Some people go deeper. I think any more than 24 months, it just becomes a lot of data. But again, you can go up to 36 months and so on. And what you want to do is almost like a runway with planes. You want to see how are they moving, how are they coming up the pathway. And the key thing is that for all the critical roles, ideally, we should have ready now leaders to step up should something happen. Couple of watch outs here. One is that when you have for an area, for a critical role, what I see is a lot of the times you have people from that same area in the succession to come up. I think we should encourage to have people from other areas in the business to be part of that pathway as well, because there may be people in other areas of your business that could be equally ready now for a job in a different area. And by doing that, you are encouraging mobility, you are encouraging your leaders to think more enterprise-wise, and you are encouraging more flexibility of resources. The other thing to consider as well is that you don't always have to have internal people in your succession pathways. Sometimes organizations have external people, and they identify those people early, and they work hard at getting those people at some stage when they're ready to join their team. The key thing for me is make sure that the more choice you have to cover those critical roles, the better to deal with any trouble or issue that might come up. Another little thing that I gave is another kind of template where you have your critical roles and then you identify the competencies by role. Just to give you a further detail as to, when you're looking at those roles, if you look at the critical competencies, you might see a participant or a person that has maybe very good on competency 1, 3, and 4, but maybe not 2. It allows you to have a better assessment of their readiness, but it allows you to target the development in a more concise way. Okay, so future capabilities. when I think of future capabilities, I always think of the movie with RoboCop and you know, all of that kind of stuff. I think the future is going to be better than some people make it to be. I think there'll always be a role for us, for people. It is clear, though, that robots are doing a lot of work that were being done by people. They're taking over some of those jobs. And I think our role as leaders is to help people move into developing capabilities and jobs that will make them okay for the future. Interestingly enough, if we will look at the World Economic Forum and the Center for Leadership, Creative Leadership, there are some of the 10 capabilities that they are actually come up and identify as potential key core capabilities for the future. So again, if you're thinking about creating bench strength, maybe rather than looking at developing people for future, some roles, maybe just look at how do you develop a bench, a group of people on those capabilities with a view that these new jobs may come up. You don't know what they will be, but you have people with some of those skills that will allow them to flex regardless of what that job is. I would go, yeah. Anyway, just to make the point that even with emotional intelligence, there's some artificial intelligence now that robots can be programmed to read emotions and to look at your face and to know how you're feeling. That's just quite scary. But again, to me, the key thing is about, okay, what's the future looks like? What are the capabilities? How can we build our people to develop those so that they are still relevant and fit for purpose? Okay, now we move on to identify your high performance and your high potentials. This is the traditional 9 bucks, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. For me, it's about the robust discussion. It's not necessarily about where people go, but it's about having a good discussion ongoingly about where people are with them, with the business leaders. And the whole point here is to help people to be at their best and encourage that they grow according to their needs, but also to the business needs to step up to critical roles or key roles or important roles. But again, the key thing is that once you have made the assessment, once you have differentiated, is what's going to happen as a result. So now we move to identifying high potentials. And look, there's a number of approaches that you can use to identify high potentials. I'm going to share with you a couple of them, but there's more out there. And what I would say to you, for me, the key thing is, what does high potential mean to you in your business? And what methodology are you going to use to assess them? And it doesn't have to be just an assessment. It could be an assessment with a conversation with our manager, with a conversation with a senior leader. It could be the performance manager. It could be a whole mixture of things. But the key thing is that it has to link up to objective data as much as possible to your definition of high potential. According to SHL and SEB, they look at 3 areas: ability, aspiration, and engagement. Particularly like their engagement piece, which talks about emotional commitment, rational commitment, discretionary effort, and intent to stay. Really, really good criteria there to see, look, do these people that I'm highlighting as high potentials have all of those engagement components? And if not, are they really the people I need to invest on for the future? Let me then move on to there's another way to assess people, which is the Korn Ferry methodology. And similar to the SEB, they look for drivers. You know, what makes you wanting to become a leader, to take on more responsibility, to have a clear career path, focused career path. Do you have cross-functional experiences, self-awareness, awareness of others, agility, results agility, people agility, capacity of reasoning strategically, to think strategically, leadership traits around focus, around perseverance, and the risk of derailment. What's the risk if I was to promote you to a position 2 levels up, that maybe you derail in terms of becoming too obsessive, task obsessive, or maybe micromanagement, or maybe is there any risk of derailment basically to that high potential? What else to look for? Well, look, the list you can go on for days, but here is the Harvard Business Review: strategic orientation, customer impact, team leadership, collaboration. Actually, collaboration for me is going to be one of those things that is going to differentiate great organizations from just good organizations. You and I know that you know, always having the best players on the pitch doesn't guarantee success. I think it's to have the best players, ideally, but in a way that they're collaborating to achieve a greater result. So I think collaboration is going to be a critical competency. So another thing is identifying your critical succession risks. So literally you have your criticality, retention risks. And again, it's just another lens to look at your talent pool. And having all of that decision, all of that data, then it's the role of you and the leaders to say, okay, so what's the best thing to do? Well, first of all, what is the availability? What is the viability? And then what do we do? Do we buy it? Do we build it? What's the best way? What's the most cost-effective way? What's going to be the impact if we go one way or another? The wonderful thing of all of these things is no other that it generates the right discussion, and that discussion should be regular and ongoing. Finally, I think one of the final things is that once you have identified those people, those positions, the placement on the box, all of that stuff is about outcomes. What are you going to do with these people? What are the outcomes expected? And how do you track that? And how you measure that? So we're almost getting there. When I look at best practices, I'll give you my top 10, right? For me, it's about ongoing talent discussions, transparency as far as you can, encourage talent mobility and sharing, critical roles, align critical roles to your strategy. And I think another key thing is that don't take for granted that we know what our successors or high potentials need. Work very closely with them to help them. They'll tell you, they'll work with you, they'll know what they need to be there. So engage them in this process and work with them to jointly identify what's best for them and their development. I think another thing is that try to identify high potentials across all levels in the organization. And again, that could be quite a heavy lift. But again, go back to the point that I think if our leaders see that a core element of their job is to find those future leaders and to grow them and to develop them, it should be a little bit easier. And for me, like everything in any business, is about saying, okay, this is what we aim to achieve, this is what we did, and this is what we achieved. And what are the results in terms of successors ready now, in terms of whatever it is that you're trying to track. So in terms to close, just to say, I don't think succession is optional. I think you must do it if you want to win. The war for talent, if you want to win, if you want to stay sustainable in business, if you want to be the best you can be. I think the other thing is that a lot of the processes that we see today are very focused on the now, and I would love to see talent processes and succession processes looking more around the future. What does the future look like? What could it look like? What capabilities? How are we going to grow? How can we grow leaders for a future that is unpredictable? I honestly believe that, the only way to achieve sustainable competitive advantage long term is through people. You can bring a new process, a new technology, a new structure that can be easily duplicated and copied and replicated, a new product. Nowadays, anything can be copied. The one thing that cannot be copied is your people and your culture, for now anyway. So this is critical. If you crack this, it definitely, I think, it could be a source of competitive advantage. An area where I think we can be better is to be more transparent with our people and more candid, and to have candid conversations with people. Most of us know whether we are on this or not. We know it because you see other people being sent to all of these places, all of these programs, and then you say, how come they're going and I'm not going? So we kind of know that we are not there, but nobody's telling us. I honestly believe that, look, there's a risk to everything. But as a person, as somebody who is, himself working in an organization and so on, I believe that the way to go is transparency. Tell people what you see. At least you give them a choice to work with the feedback and do the best they can. The other thing I would say is that when I look at growing talent, growing people, to me, it needs to be aligned with performance, ongoing performance conversations that are based on future orientation, that are based on candid discussions, that are based on good feedback, no woolly feedback, and that are coaching conversations where people are encouraged to be at their best, they're encouraged to be vulnerable, they're encouraged to make mistakes that are measured mistakes, and where you and your manager can work to become the best version of yourself. So thank you very much, and now we open up for any questions. Okay, so first question is around what tend to be some of the most common challenges organizations encounter with succession planning in my experience. Okay, that's a good question. So for me, okay, so here is what I think. So my first thing is lack of common language and definitions. And I think that is a common challenge that we are facing. Get your leaders to agree, what do we mean by these things, and agree a common language, common definitions, common processes, and common ways of assessing and making talent decisions. I think another challenge is that, particularly in large organizations, there tends to be lack of a consistent approach to do these things. And I think if you can get into a consistent approach, consistent tools, consistent method, a consistent rhythm of having these conversations, that makes a big difference. The other thing that I see is that's a challenge is that we have these succession pathways, and there are so many names on them. There are so many roles on them. It just becomes unwieldy. It becomes too complex, and therefore nothing happens. I think you have to get the right balance between being thorough, being comprehensive, but not becoming so complex that you become paralyzed by analysis. So avoid paralysis by analysis. I think another challenge is how far do you go with your alignment between succession and other HR processes? How far do you go? What's the best areas to link it up to? For me, as a no-brainer, you have to link it with development at a minimum. Then maybe another area to start is with your sourcing team, and then decide where to go from there. But they will be the kind of main things. And the other challenge, I think, is that when you're looking at talent mobility, in order to help your leaders to grow and to become enterprise-wide, I find that it's very hard for leaders, in fairness, when you have some of your best people, that you have to let them go so that they can grow. But yes, you have targets to deliver on. So to get people confident, letting go some of their best talent for the benefit of the organization, and making sure that maybe some of the people they get are equally as good, that is a huge challenge. I think I don't have an answer for that one, but I think to get our leaders confident and comfortable sharing talent, talking about talent from different areas, letting their talent go because it's going to be better for them to grow, for the organization. I think there are some of the key challenges I see anyway. Okay. Next question. Got the other very positive questions. What are some of the most common frustrations? All right. So all the common challenges are probably frustrations, but I think let me give you another maybe frustrations. I think for me, one of the key frustrations is that if you spend a lot of time with your leaders going through succession planning, succession management, 9 boxes, 10 boxes, and then a senior role comes up, and then you supposedly have somebody ready now to step on that role, and then guess what? That person doesn't get the role, and somebody you never thought about before suddenly is there and lands, and you go, how did that happen? So that would be something that would be quite frustrating. I think another thing that I find quite frustrating is that after all the time we spend on these things and the amount of effort, we really are not clinical enough at monitoring progress and impact. So I think that could be another area where keep it simple, but measure impact, track impact, and it's not making any difference. And I suppose that's part of the other frustration. There's nothing more frustrating that you have people, you put it on the noun boxes, you go back and check and nothing has happened. And a final one, I think, is that I think, it goes back to transparency. From a staff perspective, it's very frustrating when you are not there, but nobody's telling you why not, and therefore you don't know what you need to do if you want to be a high performer or a high potential. So I think from a staff perspective, personally now, I think people like that transparency. They like to know and work on that. Okay, so any other questions? Some of the most common mistakes you have observed in education making succession planning. So mistakes, I think mistakes. We need to have another webinar for talking about mistakes. Look, for me, let me put that on a positive. For me, is start small, common definitions, common processes, robust discussions ongoingly with your senior team about core capabilities, core talent, who are the people that we need to grow, mine, be ready for the next job. To me, to me, it's down to that. Get into a rhythm where you and your business are on an ongoing basis. The same way you talk about risks, the same way you talk about P&L, the same way you talk about the customer experience and the impact on NPS, the Net Promoter Score. Talent should be another agenda item. As a leader, we need to encourage leaders to make talent and succession part of an ongoing discussion, not just something that happens once a quarter or once every 6 months. And the moment that you get people to have these discussions ongoingly about, the future capabilities, what do we need to implement our plans, who are the people that are delivering all the sales, what happens if Johnny goes, even though he's getting a disproportionate amount of P&L coming through the door. It's that kind of rich discussion that I would love to see leaders having in order to help build the bench strength, the capabilities to implement a strategy and deliver business results. Okay, one more question. One challenge we see is that very high-level positions have to be based at the headquarters, which then rules out suitable talent. Is this common, or do you see change in this area? So let me read this again. One challenge we see is that very high-level positions have to be based at headquarters. Well, let me ask the question, why do they have to be based in headquarters? Is that our view of the world? Does that view of the world has to be changed? Do we need to challenge that assumption? I would say in my world, people need to be as close to the customer as possible. So whatever the customer is, that's where the people should be. If having all the influential people in headquarters is causing you challenges, for me, it's why do you feel that way? What's the impact? How you work to change that? I think if I relate to this question, one of the biggest challenges that I see is that when you have a big organization, it's always us versus them, HQ versus other areas, people in the smaller non-HQ areas, or maybe people that are working abroad versus the people that are in Dublin, if Dublin is the headquarters. Let me go back to this point. For me, if you're a leader is about visibility. We have to encourage our leaders to be visible and to lead people. Very hard to lead people remotely. Why? Because leadership is about connecting people at an emotional level. In order to do that, you have to spend time with them, you have to be seen by them, you have to be role model for them. I believe we have to create a space for leaders to be visible where they need to be. And again, it goes back to the amount of our leaders that they spend managing versus doing. We have created in a lot of cases situations where we promote, as you only know too well, leaders because of their technical competence, and that's perfectly fine. But what about their leadership competence? Are we hiring these people the right way? Are we creating time? Are we making it okay for these leaders to be leading, or are we putting too much pressure on them to deliver on technical work? Look, I don't have an answer to this. I think we are all experiencing that challenge. I always find that there is a them and us, HQ versus other areas. I'll tell you that one thing. I think the leaders that I have found that are most powerful, most influential, most credible are those leaders that actually make it their business to be out and about, to be visible, not just with people, but in their business. So I love a business leader that if you are in a retail business, that will make it his or her business to go to every shop once in a while, be seen, be visible, find people doing the right thing and tell them and encourage them and create energy around the business. Look, easier said than done. I don't think you can change that overnight, but I mean, very hard to lead from HQ if all your troops are out in the regions. I don't have an answer for you other than to say it is an issue. Enable them to have time, make it okay for them to be okay to go out, meet the troops, talk to the troops, engage that. Here is the challenge, right? It's very easy to measure targets. It's very easy to measure output. It's very easy to measure sales. Much more difficult to measure leadership. Much more difficult to measure collaboration. Much more difficult to measure the engagement and the impact and the climate that your leaders are having on the troops and the customer experience. But which one is more important? Well, maybe neither or, but both are equally as important. So although that is harder to measure, are we allowing, are we encouraging the right conditions for our leaders to be out there, be more visible, and be doing what they should be doing, which is to grow the leaders of the future rather than maybe just delivering short-term results. Thank you very much. Hope everybody got one thing of benefits, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Pedro, for a super session. Well, that wraps it up, guys. I suppose I want to thank Pedro for the last 50 odd minutes. Again, we have the session recorder. We're going to share the slides because there's a lot of content there, really, really good content. And we look forward to welcome to the next webinar. We're going to be scheduling a webinar in May in partnership with Deloitte, and will look through the Deloitte's annual human capital report, and it'll look at the global trends that are coming through, but also the local trends. We ran this webinar last year. There's some really interesting findings that came out of it. So again, watch the space. We'll send out some communications on it, but it'll be around May. We'll be running that session. So again, thank you for taking the time, and thank you to Pedro.
Thank you very much. Thank you.